Welcome into the second ever episode of the Swamp247 Recruiting Show. My name is Jacob Rudner, alongside the great Blake Alderman, Swamp247's recruiting analyst. Blake, we started on a slow note, I think, relative to what the fan base, I think, wanted the first recruiting podcast to be about. Cormani McClain picked Miami. We recorded a podcast afterwards discussing Florida's miss of their top prospect, of the cherry on top of the class. But this week, we're lightening the mood. We're talking good news on the Swamp247 Recruiting Show this week. Some news for the Gators with regard to two top, now both 2023 prospects, Desmond Ricks and John Walker. Let's discuss the news first, and then we'll take it a step further and maybe break down these prospects a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Desmond Ricks, considering the loss of Cormani McClain to Miami, Florida's still looking, not necessarily a huge need in the defensive backfield. Cormani McClain, for a lot of reasons, elite player, top target, Gator-friendly area, the need in general of infusing top-tier talent, all those things were reasons why Florida was still pushing really hard for a guy like that, considering what they have in their defensive back class. Move that over to Desmond Ricks now. Was already a guy that they were recruiting heavily before the Cormani McClain miss. Was a guy that was in the 2024 class, reclassified to 2023. Has visited Florida 3 times already this year. Showed up back in January as a 2024. Came back again for Friday Night Lights as a 2024. Was there the entire weekend of Friday Night Lights. Came back for the LSU game, which was right before he reclassified. Really close with Corey Raymond, but he's set another visit to Florida. He set an official visit. He's going to be in Gainesville on December 2nd. He'll be there that entire weekend. So, with Florida really trying to look for, the star players, the elite types of guys, Desmond Ricks checks off a lot of those boxes himself. After reclassifying to the 2023 class, 24/7 Sports on the composite rankings has him as a 5-star player. So, there's still a chance for Florida to, continue to reel in, those defensive backs, an elite player like that, that would, I wouldn't say it completely softens the blow of losing Cormani McClain, because the perception of that loss and among other things, really made that one a big stinger for Florida. But it definitely, helps quite a bit. Let's say it puts a little bit of aloe on a sunburn of, missing Cormani McClain. Desmond Ricks, big time guy himself, originally from the Virginia area, transferred or moved to IMG Academy down there in Bradenton. His family actually moved down to Florida too. They live in somewhere around the Sarasota area. So, Alabama's going to get an official visit. LSU should get an official visit. I think that those 2 schools, along with Florida, are probably the 3 most talked about schools. I think LSU is the one where rumor mills and, just kind of checking around with sources and whatnot, that's the team that a lot of people are watching. I think that as of, right now, LSU and Alabama are probably in a little bit better of a spot than Florida. But that's not something to where, you can count Florida out here. You've got Corey Raymond there, really likes, Corey Raymond. That's pretty much the driving reason of his interest in Florida. So, that's a chance for Florida to, continue to hopefully land in a 5-star type of player. And, I think that for John Walker, the 4-star defensive lineman from Kissimmee Osceola, who committed to UCF back in July, there's a lot of reasons why you could say that, he's the biggest need for Florida and probably their top target of need right now for the 2023 class. The need for defensive linemen has been, well documented. He's a guy that has been near the top or on top of Florida's, defensive line wish list for most of the year. Committed to UCF back in the summer. Was kind of the hometown feel there. The family really liked the fact that he was, close to home there. He could be, the dude immediately when he steps on campus at UCF. So there were a lot of reasons behind that commitment there, on top of good relationships with the staff. There were a lot of things that why Walker, maybe made a surprising pick to some people, picking UCF over, the Miamis, the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Floridas, those types of schools. So Florida really never batted an eye when he committed to UCF, continued to recruit him hard. Really, the contact level did not drop off at all. And he's visited for, I think, 3 games already this season. He's taken unofficial visits, and he's locked in an official visit for December 9th. So that's 2 weekends, I think, before National Signing Day, or excuse me, the early signing period, which is a 3-day period there where guys can sign in early if they don't want to wait all the way till February. about 85, I would say. I mean, that's a fake number I just made up, but the large majority of guys sign in December. So Florida's getting that official visit right there close to the early signing period. They're going to be able to lay out, playing time, answer a lot of questions. And I think the biggest thing for Florida at that official visit is that the fact that the family will be on campus. I mentioned that he's taken those unofficial visits to Florida this year, has not had family with him on those unofficial visits. So this is a chance for family to get the questions answered and talk things over with the staff. It's a chance for John to really sit down and have things broken down of early playing time, how they want to use him, all those questions that he has left remaining. So Florida's got some juice in this recruitment. I'm not ready to predict a complete flip yet, but there's a lot of growing confidence in Gainesville about where they stand with him. And I think a lot of, will the flip happen or will it not happen? I think a lot of those questions will be answered on that official visit. So that's a big visit for Florida in December. I'm sure you'll see more pop up, official visits in December. The bulk of Florida's remaining targets, they haven't used official visits this fall other than the LSU game. So a lot of those remaining targets have official visits left to use to Florida, and I think you'll see them use the bulk of those in December. I don't think you'll see any official visitors set up for the South Carolina game, Florida's last home game. So 2 big official visitors for Florida in December, 2 big positions of need. One, just off the fact of, the numbers are there, and, which is in John Walker, and then Desmond Ricks, who's a guy that is in need just for being an elite type of player, and again, can have a chance to be that cherry on top of a really good defensive back class that Florida already has.
And it's not just a need, I guess, at defensive back. Like you said, it's already a very strong class in terms of who Florida has in the fold. But talk about the impact John Walker could make. I mean, this is a team that does not have a very deep defensive line currently on its roster. And it's something that you and I discussed on the show last week, which is this is a team that really needs some reinforcement, whether that comes from the high school level at the defensive line position or even if they attack the transfer portal. I think it's become quite clear that defensive line help is in need in Gainesville. Javon Dexter is playing more snaps per game than any Power 5 defensive tackle at the moment. He's exhausted. I believe Desmond Watson, who, there were questions about his conditioning coming into the season. Guy's 6'5", 400 plus pounds, and he plays over 40 snaps per game lately on a defensive line that really is just quite thin from an overall number standpoint. So a guy like Walker could provide quite an impact. Blake, it's not the only news that we have on the Swamp247 Recruiting Show. This is a pretty good little nugget, I think, that fans are going to be excited about. Quarterback DJ Lagway. Tell me what's going on there.
Yeah, with Florida playing Texas A&M this weekend, they'll be out in the state of Texas leading up before that game. DJ Lagway lives in Texas himself, the 2024 top target at quarterback for Florida in the next cycle. Florida's expected to have some coaches at his game on Friday. I can tell you for sure, as of right now, I know that Jabbar Jalouk, Florida's running backs coach, is the one coach that is expected to be out there for the game. But I was talking to DJ's dad earlier in the day, and he mentioned that, it's that, at least something that he's heard and something he's keeping an eye out for is for Billy Napier to possibly be out of the game. I can say for sure that Jalouk is the one that's expected. Napier, we'll see. I haven't quite confirmed that yet other than his dad mentioning that, but that would actually be Coach Napier's first recruiting visit of this year. A lot of the head coaches save those recruiting visits. They get a limited number of how many visits they can, take to go see these guys at high school games, at their high school, whatever have you, whenever you're on the recruiting trail. Head coaches get a limited number there of those visits. So Napier has not used any of those visits so far this year. So I think that if Napier does show up to that game, I think it's a big statement because it shows that DJ Lagway, being the first visit of the fall that he's taken, to go see him. I think that shows how big of a need he is in the 2024 cycle. Florida's needed that, QB1 of the future type of land. They weren't able to do that in the 2023 class. They were able to get Marcus Stokes when they flipped him from Penn State. But DJ Lagway is one of those elite type of talents, someone that, can run, he can throw, he's, put up really good numbers as a junior so far this year. And he's that game changer type of quarterback prospect that Florida has needed and what they've wanted. So I think that, if Napier does show up, I think that really shows that how big of a need that DJ Lagway is from a position standpoint, from the staff standpoint. So, for sure, Florida's going to be out there, at least having Coach Jalouk out there to see him continues to make him a priority. He's already visited a couple times this year to Florida, at least 2 games so far this year. So, Florida's still pressing really hard for Lagway. I would say that right now, Florida, Clemson, Texas A&M are probably the 3 schools to watch the closest for him. He's probably not going to make a decision until later end of this year, if not early part of next year. He's moved his timeline around a couple times. So, give or take if he does move it again. But last time I spoke with him, he was thinking of, early part of this year. So, he'll be at USC this coming weekend. That was the expectation. He's visited LSU already this year. So those are some of the schools involved with him. But I would say that, the Aggies, the Tigers, Clemson Tigers, and the Gators are probably the three schools talked about the most, probably in the best spot for him. But Florida, I mean, that's a huge need for Florida. That would be a game changer as far as, talent infusion to the roster. It's your bell cow of the 2024 class. If you can get a big time quarterback like that, other prospects take notice. So that would just be a monumental get for Florida, and, the continuing to make him a priority like they have, that's Florida's continuing to do the right things there with him. And, they're going to continue to keep working hard on him. And, that's the top target for Florida in 24.
That's the number 24 overall prospect in the class, number 4 quarterback, and number 4 prospect in the state of Texas, according to the 247 Sports Composite. And just to color that in with some team analysis here, this obviously, it goes without saying that recruiting the quarterback position is extremely important. But with where Florida is right now, from a roster construction standpoint, the emphasis, in my opinion, is even higher. You have a guy in Anthony Richardson. My personal sense, I'm not saying that this is what I'm hearing, but if I had to guess, I would evaluate him to be more likely to depart the program than to return to it after the season, despite, the near 50% completion rate, the interception concerns. But I still think that he is more likely right now to leave than he is to return. And if that's the case, it puts Florida in an interesting situation. Next year, there are questions about who would start at quarterback. Jalen Kitna's on the roster. He's the clear backup right now. Jack Miller has eligibility. He's only a sophomore right now, so he could technically be a candidate. Marcus Stokes is the freshman coming in, although I don't really evaluate him to be a likely plug-and-play type for the Gators. And then there's always the transfer portal. But to be able to bring in a guy of the caliber of DJ Lagway, top 25 prospect on the composite, top 50 by 247 Sports independently, it kind of goes without saying that would obviously make quite the impact on the roster if Florida is able to secure him. So some big news there on the DJ Lagway front, potentially having Billy Napier at his game on Friday before the Gators take on the Texas A&M Aggies. And I will use this opportunity before we wrap up here with our last segment to plug our other podcasts. 2 podcasts out this week before this one. Myself and staff writer Graham Hall, we reviewed Florida's performance against Georgia and then previewed their game against Texas A&M. That podcast was released yesterday, November 3rd. Make sure you check that out on YouTube or wherever you get your audio-only platform podcasts. Blake, let's wrap this thing up with our newest segment of the Swamp247 Recruiting Show, Blake's Takes, where you give us 3 standout performers from high school games among Gator commitments. I guess just go right through them. Let's hear who you got as the top Gator commit performers at the high school level this past week.
Well, I started off with Kelby Collins, Florida's 4-star defensive line commit. I don't have his exact stat line of what he did in his game this past week, but, from watching the film, he had a lot of tackles. He was in the backfield a lot, just looking at his regular season, because last week's on Friday was their last regular season game. In Alabama, the state where he lives, they'll be starting the high school playoffs this coming week. So to finish off his regular season, he finished with 101 total tackles and 12 sacks. So, a guy that was active in the backfield. We mentioned earlier how Florida has a huge need in the defensive line. Kelby Collins, we talked about, a guy that I think that can come in and make an impact, can move between the 3 technique and the 5 technique. He's someone that I expect to be baptized by fire. He's going to be thrown into the fire early during his career at Florida. And those numbers that he's put up, and again, I don't have the exact stat number from this past week, but if you watch his film on Huddle, he was all over the place. It looked like, from watching his game week to week basis on Huddle, whenever he drops those, I've watched every game, every week he's had. This is the one that, looking at the tape, was the one that I think probably was his best game. If I see those numbers later on, I think that it's probably going to be his best game of the season that he's had. He was all over the place. Past that, Trayon Webb has been really good for his Trinity Christian team in Jacksonville, the 4-star running back commit for Florida. Already on the season, he's got 844 rushing yards, 14 touchdowns. And this past week, he had 141 yards on 6 carries, so 3 touchdowns. That's an insane stat line. One of those runs that he had for a touchdown was like 74, 75 yards. So, Trayon Webb, he's banged up last year as a junior, didn't have the stats that he probably would have wanted to. As a senior, he's really putting together a really good season by those stats. He's got at least a touchdown every game. He's had multiple games where he's had 2 touchdowns at least in those games. So, Trayon Webb has, he's getting a helmet sticker for me this past week, so he's got one there. And then, from 2024 class, I think Miles Graham is probably the next one, and he is really a do-it-all player for his team out of Woodward Academy in Atlanta, Georgia. Just this past Friday, he had 16 carries for 75 yards and a touchdown. He caught a 4-yard pass. And then on defense, he had 8 tackles, 2 of those for a loss and a sack. And that's a guy that is playing high-level football on both sides of the ball from offense and defense, who's going to play linebacker for Florida. So not only are you seeing that he is a good player on defense, by the stats there, he's got the pedigree of, his father who, Ernest Graham, who played at Florida, played in the NFL, but you've got a guy that is looking extremely athletic and running the ball as well. So, that's a good sign, seeing a guy that's going to play defense, who still has the athleticism to play offense at a high level, maybe not at the college level, but at least at the high school level. So 3rd helmet stickers going to Miles Graham.
There you go. There you have it. Gator commit top performers from the previous week of high school action. That'll do it, though, for this episode of the Swamp247 Recruiting Show.
Come down, Marco Wilson.
There you go. Don't toss us, though. We appreciate the follows and the listen. Make sure you check us out over at swamp247.com, because in addition to the podcast content that we provide weekly, we also have a whole bunch of written content to go with it, and that message board. Active community. Lots of people coming through there, and you and I drop some information on the board all the time that we might not write about or post on social media. So if you really want the full experience of Gator insider reporting, go on over to swamp247.com and hit subscribe. We would encourage you to do so. But I think I'm gonna bid everyone adieu for this episode of the Recruiting Show. We will see you next week, and we hope you have a good one.